In attendance today, we have, of course, myself, Chair of the committee, and representing the 4th District, Councilman Cohen, representing the 1st District, Councilman Costello, representing the 11th District, Councilwoman Porter, representing the 10th District. And I think that's all we have in attendance today from the committee. Representing the Office of the President, I've got Preston Lewis in the back. And representing the Mayor's Office, well, we'll get to Monty in a bit. This afternoon, the committee will have hearings on Bill 23-0187R, an informational hearing on thefts of cars, and Bill LO 22-0030, crime reduction and violence prevention, specifically focused on juvenile crime. So for 23-0187R, informational hearing on theft of cars, this is for the purpose of inviting the Deputy Mayor of Public Safety and representatives of the Baltimore City Police Department, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, the Office of the State's Attorney for Baltimore City, the Baltimore City Sheriff's Office, the Office of the Maryland Attorney General, the Maryland Department of Transportation and Motor Vehicle Administration, and the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services to engage in a discussion with the City Council regarding the recent rise in auto thefts throughout Baltimore City, including a discussion of options to prevent or mitigate such occurrences. This bill was introduced on September 18, 2023, and it was sponsored by Councilmember Cohen. I'll open the floor to Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the fellow members of this committee, to the Baltimore Police Department, to MONSE, to DJS, to MDOT, MVA, DOT, all the other agency leaders that are here, as well as staff. Thank you to the residents who took time out of your day to participate and make your voice heard. We're here today to address car thefts and carjackings, which have reached an unacceptable level in our city. I want to start by talking about the victims of these crimes. I want to talk about the pedestrian who was crushed under the rubble and killed in February when a driver crashed a stolen Kia into a building. I want to talk about my constituent in Canton who was shot and killed during a carjacking this summer. I want to talk about my elderly neighbor in Brewers Hill who was violently assaulted by individuals driving stolen cars who were on a robbery and carjacking spree. And I want to talk about all of our constituents and our neighbors across Baltimore, 9,313 so far this year, who have woken up to find their cars stolen and know there is only a 60% chance that they will get them back. A car theft is not just an inconvenience. These are not victimless crimes. These actions cause families to consider leaving our city or think twice about moving here. We're here to talk about how we do better as a city in partnership with state and federal governments. I do not want to see agencies pointing fingers at other agencies. It is clear that part of what needs improvement is coordination and collaboration, and we need to focus on how all of us can play our part and do better. This weekend, the state delegation for the 46th District and I sent a letter to BPD and DJS expressing our concern about suspects being released hours after their arrest for a very violent crime. Let me be clear, we should not see suspects of any violent crime released immediately without follow-up or explanation. It undermines justice for the victims, the public, and frankly, the perpetrators. We are seeking closer coordination and a review of internal policies and procedures. We will dive into that today. It is essential that residents understand how public safety decisions are made. There needs to be swift consequences for violent behavior. There's a hearing happening right now, by coincidence, in the state legislature, and we will leave questions about sentencing to our colleagues, but I believe that better outcomes are possible within the existing laws, and it will take interagency collaboration to get there. About half of juvenile car theft and carjacking suspects are rearrested again within the following year. I will close by acknowledging the Mayor's auto theft strategy update. I'm grateful to our partners in the administration for continuing to prioritize these issues. Kia and Hyundai have created a national crisis by failing to install industry standard technology in some of their vehicles, and is left to cities like Baltimore to deal with it. I look forward to ongoing collaboration with all of our agencies, with local, state, and federal partners, and most importantly, with our residents. The time to point fingers is over. The time to collectively solve these challenges and move Baltimore forward is now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. We're going to go over. You're talking about the streaming?
Us recording you here is way very modulated. We can't, it's not usable audio, so whatever you're saying, we can't use for television.
You can't hear. I understand.
I hate to waste the effort, because everything sounds a little better now, just as you were talking about.
I see. It's high. Okay. We'll take a moment to figure out the sound, just so folks are able to hear. Just for folks that weren't able to hear, effectively, we're hearing that the audio is overmodulated, causing difficulty for folks listening in.
Overmodulation, though, gets you every time.
That it will. Thank you, Councilman. Testing, testing, testing. Testing, testing. You can hear me now? Sounds better? Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. Totally appreciate it. Okay. Forgive me, everyone who's joining us virtually and has to bear with this. Just want to make sure that we have good sound. Just checking, testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So we're good? No problem. I'm glad we were able to figure it out. So we're going to jump back into the hearing. We're going to turn it over to agency reports. First up, we have the Baltimore City Police Department.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Erin Murphy, Director of Government Affairs for Baltimore City Police Department. I'm here with Command. We stand in support of the bill and look forward to a meaningful conversation.
Thank you. Next up, we've got the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement.
Oh.
All right, so we're going to go first to DGS. I understand they have a presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Gary, Deputy Secretary for DJS, the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services. My shop is Community Services, which is intake, probation, aftercare services, community detention, and resource office. So let me go to the presentation. Okay.
Just have to make it bigger.
Yeah. Okay. Trying to go back one. Okay. So for the purposes of the presentation, we were asked for to review detention process, intake processes, as well as to present data on auto theft and carjacking, both armed and unarmed. For detention requests, the process Upon a youth being arrested, a young person being arrested, the police department can request detention from the Department of Juvenile Services. We at that time review cases, we review and read the police report. We also speak with the youth and the family, and we complete what is called a detention risk assessment instrument. That is an instrument that we've been using for the last 12 years. It's been validated, which means that's the scientific process to determine if the tool is predicting risk in the correct way. It was validated in, I believe, 2015. And updated twice since that time. And so once we apply the detention risk assessment instrument, we get a sense of a youth's low, moderate, or high risk of failing to appear for court and or picking up a new offense. And I want to distinguish between picking up a new offense while awaiting charges versus recidivism. That's different. Recidivism is rearrest after a course of treatment and through juvenile justice services. So our detention risk assessment instrument is solely looking at youth risk of reoffending or failing to appear for scheduled hearings for the current alleged offense. As a result of that screening, we can do several things. We can release that young person to an alternative to detention. Alternatives to detention includes community detention with or without electronic monitoring. It also can include evening reporting centers. Then we can also make a decision to detain the young person until the next court day, which means that they will go into hardware secure detention, and they will be released to the court the next business day to either continue the detention or to modify the decision of DJS. The third decision that we could make is to release a young person to the care and custody of the guardian, and that is if it is a low-risk young person. After DJS does the first authorization for detention or an alternative to detention, those young people go, they are placed on what is called the emergency arraignment docket. That is the docket where the court will hear the case the next business day, and again, they make a decision to either continue detention or to continue DJS's recommendation on an alternative, or they can release. Our alternatives to detention, again, includes community detention with or without electronic monitoring, evening reporting centers, as well as being able to do a hybrid of all three. So for the most intense cases, the youth who have the highest risk, they can potentially be on community detention with electronic monitoring, plus have to attend the evening reporting center, which is from 3 to 8 p.m. every single day, Monday through Friday. All kids who are on community detention are expected to be under total house arrest, meaning that they are only allowed to come out for scheduled and pre-approved activities that would include school, work, or anything that parents ask DJS, CD officers, or CD workers for permission for youth to participate in. Outside of those activities, a young person who is on community detention with or without electronic monitoring is expected to be in the home 24/7. It's total house arrest. And when we look at our detention risk assessment instrument, the instrument is measuring a number of predictive factors of a youth who has a high probability of not appearing for court or reoffending while awaiting a court hearing on current charges. And so we look at the history of that young person, how many sustained adjudications, meaning if they have an active open court order with us for supervision. We look at the age of first offense. If they are under 16, that was found to be more predictive if they were under 16 at the time of their very first offense. We also look at their history of AWOL and their histories of failure to appear. The next process that I want to go through is the intake process. That is the process by which we receive referrals. The majority of our referrals come from police, but sometimes it can be citizens themselves. It can be schools, it can be communities. So, but the majority, over 90% of our referrals do actually come from, in Baltimore City, from police. They are referred to DJS, and at that time, again, we actually have conversation with the young person. family, we look at the police report, and also we conduct what is called an intake decision tool. That is a structured decision-making tool, again, based upon objective factors. We consider family and social relationships, education, career, or work history, substance abuse needs, somatic and behavioral health, and all of those factors are considered to determine how involved we are with the young person, or what our decision will be to become involved or to formally engage them in services. And from that screen, the IDT, the intake decision-making tool, we have several options. We can either resolve it with or without services. Resolve with or without services mean we don't open the file. However, we can refer the family and the youth to services in the community, and more often we do get a lot of requests from parents to help us navigate services in the community. And so that is an area of our work that we are working to expand and strengthen over time in terms of resolving with services. We also have the option
Deputy
to-
Secretary, I'm going to pause you for a second. It seems Charm TV is down. So we're going to take a second and recess for a moment to figure out what's going on with Charm TV.
Okay.
I apologize for interrupting your presentation, but we do want to make sure folks have an opportunity to hear what's going on.
Thank you.
All right, we haven't entirely figured it out. However, we do have this meeting being recorded. It will be posted later on. The streaming is messed up somehow. So I apologize for folks that will see this video later and are unable to participate live in the moment, but we do want to make sure we have a lot of people here who are going to be contributing. I want to provide a little bit of context on the sort of flow of the meeting. We have a lot of guests who are here probably looking to testify. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow the agencies to give their reports from their perspective, what's going on, how they're related to the issue of car thefts in the city. And then we'll go to the council members for questioning, and then we'll go to the public and allow for public testimony. So just want to, for folks here looking to testify, I just want to give you a sense of the flow. Also, with regards to the Department of Juvenile Services, why this is especially relevant is because what we're finding is that a lot of the carjackings that we're seeing are related to a TikTok challenge. And we're seeing that a lot of young people are, in fact, stealing cars. And so, of course, a lot of this then goes to DJS, and understanding this process is really important to understanding how we resolve it in the long term. So with that, Deputy Secretary, I want to turn it back over to you. I apologize for interrupting your presentation.
No problem at all. And I'll just go back to the point of upon doing an intake and actually administering the intake decision-making tool, when the kid is referred to us for an alleged offense, we can resolve it with or without services, knowing that we are seeking to increase the number of cases where we're resolving with services and helping families navigate systems in order to get what they need. We also can pre-court the case and up to 90 days. A pre-court is an informal supervision. It may include a service. It may include a task or a combination thereof. It can be individual or family counseling. It can be evidence-based services, mentoring, teen court, choice program, victim awareness, anger management, and as well as we're bringing restorative justice online to do more community mediation so that victims have a voice and a means of being restored and being able to address young people, because that is what a lot of our victims are requesting, a meeting with young people to pretty much say what harm they suffered as a result of a delinquent offense. We can also forward the case to the state's attorney, and by Maryland, by statute, we are required to forward all crimes of violence to the state's attorney for formal charging. So those are the three options we can do: resolve, pre-court, or forward to the state's attorney. And once we forward to the state's attorney, then that office has the ability to, or the decision to either petition the case formally, which is to charge the young person in the juvenile court jurisdiction, or they may choose not to do a petition. They also have an opportunity to divert at that stage. That is similar to our pre-court, so the state's attorney may actually divert a case depending upon their resources as well as their review of the case. And then if we do pre-court a young person, if they are not successful in meeting the terms and conditions of that pre-court, they actually get forwarded to the state's attorney's office for formal charging. So that is the process by which we try to address delinquency and hold youth accountable, but also ensure that we are forwarding cases in a timely manner, those that require the attention of the state's attorney and require court action. I think it's a delay. Okay, so our case forwarding decisions, Baltimore City DJS intake refers cases to the juvenile court at a much higher rate than the rest of the state. As you can see from this particular table, nearly 2 of every 3 of our cases are referred to the state's attorney for formal charging in Baltimore City. That also likely has a lot to do with the more significant or more serious offenses for young people here in Baltimore City. So we do actually refer 2 of every 3 to the state's attorney for formal charging. And then we also resolve 25% of our cases in FY 2022 we resolved. And that is because we began using the intake decision-making tool. And so a lot of our decision-making may have been driven by the tool to resolve those cases, as well as being able to increase the use of informal supervision and different techniques in terms of teen court, anger management, shoplifter abatement, and things of that nature for our case forwarding decisions. For petition complaints, these are the complaints that we forward to the state's attorney's office. Of that 61.5%, we can report that our data shows that 42.6% resulted in an active court order. And when I say active court order, that means that the court actually placed the young person either under order of supervision, of probation, or committed the young person to the Department of Juvenile Services for placement. The other 57.32% is identified as other. Other includes cases where they resulted in a dismissal, a closure, non-pros, stat, mutual postponement, services not ordered or petition withdrawn or denied by the state's attorney. At this stage, it's beyond DJS's door, but it is part of judicial processing in terms of agreements made between the state's attorney, the Office of the Public Defender, or the young person's private attorney in the court. So for the matter of bringing what brought us here, I think I went too far. Okay. Auto theft. This is really delayed, I'm sorry. Okay, auto theft and carjacking, armed and unarmed. This is really sensitive. Okay, I think it's done. Armed and unarmed carjacking. Again, 2 of every 3 auto theft was referred, while 97% of all carjacking, armed or unarmed, was forwarded to the state's attorney, with only 3% not forwarded, but perhaps informal, which means that, and it depends on situations. There can be mitigating factors in a case where you may have a young person. It may have been a group carjacking, and one young person was not as involved as the other kids, and so that youth may have a pre-court agreement, particularly if they have no prior record with us, or we see a reasonable amount of family and social support for that young person in community, but that happens very rarely for a carjacking offense. 97% are referred to the state's attorney's office. And for auto theft, of the petition cases, we see that 1 out of every 4 are undecided. Undecided cases are things that are still pending that could be due to mutual postponements and other types of judicial proceedings where a decision has not been reached yet. But of the 67% that we did forward for auto theft, not carjacking, but the auto theft charges, we see that 32% resulted in probation and 5% in committed to DJS, with, again, 1 of every 4, 26%, being undecided, and 37% are being other. And again, for our purposes and our record keeping, other is indicated by petitions that result in a dismissal, a closure, non-prostet, mutual postponement, services not ordered, or withdrawn or denied by the state's attorney's office for auto theft. For carjacking, armed and unarmed, petition complaints, of the 97%, and that total, the total number for carjacking is actually 34 kids for FY 2023. Of that 97%, 40% were undecided. Again, because of they are still pending, or they are other. 20 of the 34 kids, 24% probation, 36% placed on who were committed. So 60% of carjacking offenses, armed and unarmed, result in juvenile court jurisdiction. That is a court order for active supervision, either probation or commitment to DJS for placement. And I failed to mention for the auto thefts, it was 208 cases of auto thefts for FY 2023.
And Deputy Secretary, I want to just be crystal clear and make sure all of the numbers you're quoting today are specifically for Baltimore City, not for the state.
Specifically for Baltimore City. These
Excellent.
are the Baltimore City numbers.
Excellent.
And
Thank you.
and again, a lot of, I know the numbers for undecided are significantly high in my opinion, but beyond our door, there's all different types of judicial processing that may result in that case still pending and without a decision at the time that we pulled this data. But in looking at FY 2023, we understand that we had a better pool of data to present that was paints a better picture, a fuller picture of auto theft and carjacking in Baltimore City.
I'm curious with that. You mentioned the undecideds. You mentioned that the undecideds are high. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, are we seeing a similar, significantly high trend in surrounding counties? And are we seeing, 26 you're saying is high. What are we typically seeing for those undecideds in other counties?
We have not looked at that data.
Okay.
What I can say is that the overall number of not only auto thefts, but specifically carjackings in other jurisdictions does not even compare to what we see in Baltimore City. But without having actual data, I wouldn't be able to say specifically.
appreciate that.
But if
Thank
you would like that, we can get that back to you.
Yeah, it would be helpful to see how we compare.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I believe that's the end of our data presentation. So,
Thank you. We are next going to go to, is it Monty this time? Monty. We're going to go to the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement.
Thank you very much. My name is Stephanie Mavronis. I serve as the interim director of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. For the purpose of this hearing, Monty was asked to provide some information about the diversion landscape and also opportunities for stronger interagency coordination. I think some of the things we'll talk about during this presentation can inform the conversation on this portion of the hearing and the next one as well. So this just gives an overview on some of what we'll be talking about. I want to move through relatively quickly and highlight two of the areas that are important for us to think about when we're considering diversion, really how we steer individuals away from the criminal legal system entirely while addressing underlying factors, and also thinking about for people who do have some kind of contact, whether they're a youth offender or an adult offender, what can we do to make sure that person gets the support they need once they've become involved in criminal activity? So we'll start with the first piece around prevention. So we've shared this before, really just to showcase the components that may be a part of that preventative effect, which you can see on the CVI or community violence intervention side of this map. When we're thinking about mediation, efforts to promote healthy conflict resolution, and other sorts of initiatives, school-based violence intervention, which we'll talk about in a little bit. These are all preventative measures which, if effective, should be reducing crime in the immediate term and steering people away entirely from engagement with any of our law enforcement or rehabilitative systems. And when we think about mediation and violence intervention, I mentioned school-based violence intervention, the hospital-based violence intervention programs really focusing on making sure we're reducing re-victimization and retaliation. Familiar with Safe Streets, We Are Us, Challenge to Change, just a couple. It's not an exhaustive list of some of our partners in this space, and community mediation services more broadly. And so, like I said, for school-based intervention and youth programming, really it's about preventative work, building student skills and self-awareness, self-regulation, and nonviolent conflict resolution. It's also a way for us to make sure that before incidents escalate into violence, that we have the information, that we're in relationship and in conversation and communication with our student population, and can intervene where necessary before those situations escalate. And so this is work, I'll just mention that we're really excited to be partnering with not only the school system on, but more recently strengthening our partnerships with Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success, Mayor's Office of African American Male Engagement, and school leadership at the school level. If you recall, we announced that this pilot would be stood up in 3 public high schools, Burvo, Carver, and Digital Harbor. And we're actively looking at ways we can immediately support the school communities based on programming that's already happening within the schools. Okay, let me move us ahead here. So some of the other opportunities, preventative, kind of pre-interaction with our system, also relate to the work we do around stabilizing communities after traumatic incidents. So our coordinated neighborhood stabilization response work, our re-entry work, of course, making sure that someone who is returning home from incarceration is not recidivating or returning or committing any other offenses or becoming a target of violence. And then work around youth engagement, which sought to provide additional opportunities for our youth in partnership with many people, also including DJS. This is just more information about our reentry employment work. I won't belabor this point, but will just mention here in terms of safe return plans, Monty is excited to say that we're going to be onboarding our reentry coordinator actually on Monday. And then this individual really will be working with MOED and the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services to make sure that we're doing reentry planning before someone returns home with a focus on safety and supportive services. Okay, and I talked a little bit about this strategy, so I'm just going to move us ahead here. But happy to come back to any of this if there is interest. Just to say, this adds some color to the conversation around prevention. I don't think we've shared this with the council before, but it's something we're looking forward to having the team at Johns Hopkins Center for Adolescent Health really investigate and think about what we derive from our integrated youth engagement strategy. If you recall, this strategy was designed around the idea that we should be reducing law enforcement interaction with our young people who are of curfew age. And so we put people who are trained to work with youth and who have experience intervening on the ground. And so you can see at different points in time, these were just a few pulls from some of our logs in the work for youth curfew engagement, actively intervening in potential fights that were to escalate, and not just in our hotspot areas around the harbor, but also in our communities. And so just to give some example to that work. Okay. So as Monty's transitioned to being the central hub for victim services at the local level in partnership with BPD and the state's attorney's office, we've continued to provide case management services at the local level. This also includes work specific to anti-human trafficking, intimate partner violence prevention, and the Baltimore City Visitation Center, and working closely with the health department here as well. And so this is just some data about who we've assisted this year through early October. And you can see that Monty's victim services team has worked with 96 primary and secondary victims since the start of this year, and you can see that breakdown here as well. Okay. Monty, as you may be aware, operates the Baltimore City Visitation Center, a safe place where families who have histories of domestic violence can engage in supervised visitation and monitored exchange. And so this is some of the information about that work. This is a part of our broader victim services umbrella. We recently, since the start of Mayor Scott's term, expanded and doubled the hours of the visitation center, and so now operating every week, every weekend instead of every other weekend. And we just recently celebrated 10 years of service to our families. Okay, so I want to move ahead here to what the diversion landscape and our work looks like after criminal activity occurs or after that first touch with law enforcement, because there's a few other services and programs here that we play a role in. This really complex process map, which I will not go through. Everything we just discussed is not contained on here at all. So we just talked about some of the potential entry points, some of the potential mediation points prior to any sort of involvement with the system. But as you can see here in this process map, Monty may be, or one of our close service providers may be engaged when it's deemed necessary to have that referral to wraparound services. And we're actively exploring ways to work even stronger as interagency partners here, especially when it comes to our youth. I know many of us were just at a meeting at TJS. We're having conversations about where those gaps are in this process map and where we have opportunities to strengthen coordination. And so I want to highlight some of those opportunities as well. So when we think about the diversion landscape prior to any police contact, a few things I'll flag here. 911 alternative response. What would it look like to use community responders to address some 911 calls that do not require police interaction? There is a behavioral health 911 diversion pilot program that addresses certain behavioral health calls, namely suicidal ideation. That program is live citywide. We're also, as an agency, leading the development of other 911 diversion opportunities. So we're actively looking to identify alternative responses for at least 4 additional call types that don't require police response, and working hand in hand with community service providers who can play a role there. I think for some offenses that we may talk about, this is an area that we should consider, and we could talk about what that looks like specifically for youth, I believe here on the next slide, yes. So we've talked about Monty's pre-arrest diversion programs on previous occasions. I want to speak a little bit about that here. These programs are designed to reduce the number of people who are arrested and incarcerated. It's about giving law enforcement discretion to divert people for certain low-level offenses or nonviolent criminalized behaviors. So if you've heard us talk about Sidestep, this is our pre-arrest youth diversion program. Youth qualify for this if they have committed a certain Category 2 offense. In the conversation we're talking about today, for example, stolen auto could be a qualified offense. Carjacking, on the other hand, would not be at this time. Sidestep as a program is one that was designed in partnership with young people in the Western District after the Baltimore uprising. And currently, we remain in the Western District and are actively engaged in conversation with BPD about how we scale up that program and even consider some of the offenses that are most appropriate to be on that list at this time. The group violence reduction strategy in partnership with ROCA and YAP. ROCA, shout out to ROCA, who I saw come in the room, is working with our younger participants in the group violence reduction strategy, that's 16 to 24 age range, involved in or suspected to be involved in group violence. And so GVRS is a very strong and connected intervention to make sure we're not escalating to that place of arrest or offense. Okay, and so we also speak a little bit here to some of the work we've heard in previous hearings around the State's Attorney's Office citation docket and other opportunities for alignment and diversion in this space. So touching back on Sidestep, since the launch in January 2022, in the Western District alone, Sidestep has helped to divert 37 young people from involvement with the justice system through intensive case management and wraparound supports. There's a number of community-based partners that MONSE works with. MONSE's Youth Opportunity Coordinator works with these young people and their families and works to connect them to service providers who can help provide that level of enrichment and support. For the group violence reduction strategy, in the 2 districts that we've been active in, you can see here the Western District and the Southwestern District. We have 114 participants who have received services since our launch. And so these are individuals who are identified as being the most at risk for being shot or being a shooter. And these are essentially people who we've been able to divert through those services. And so you can see the range of services that are being provided with every GVRS participant receiving life coaching, and then a suite of other services that are offered by our community-based providers. I won't belabor this point, but as a testament to the effectiveness of the work when we can appropriately leverage relationships, service partnerships, and community moral voice, we see really low levels of recidivism and re-victimization, and this is what we want to, push for across the board. Okay, so just in conclusion here, I want to touch on a few areas of opportunity for coordinated response, both to this issue specifically and the broader challenges around youth violence. So MONSE provides staffing support to the Mayor's Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. Many of the principal agencies called to this hearing are a part of that body. And so this specifically is a body where policy level conversations at the principal level can and should be happening. The Youth Violence Reduction Framework, which I'll go into detail about in just another slide, is something that is in the works actively, and I think gives us another opportunity to name our values very clearly and make sure that our policy in this area is also reflective of youth voice. Student-intensive case management, this is work that the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success is leading, but affords us the opportunity to think about support and intervention for specific young people and families that any one of us as partners in this work identify. And then youth violence stat, which the city administrator and Deputy Mayor DeRaza have been convening to identify precisely opportunities like this for our coordination. So I've included some more information here about each of the opportunities for collaboration that we just mentioned. You can see here the principal agencies who are a part of the CJCC, which ranges from our local to state level officials, and the current work groups. You'll note we don't currently have a work group that's specifically focused on youth, although we do have a community justice work group, and the topic of youth comes up consistently. And so that's potentially an area where we can think about some work as we move forward. All right. I mentioned that the deputy mayor is working on the youth violence reduction framework and has been doing a number of focus groups with youth and coordinating different stakeholders. I'm not going to spend too much time here because I think we should all look ahead to when this is publicly shared. But some of the things that we're hearing from our young people is just the importance of making sure we can play a role in shaping and changing the culture and making sure that our young people in particular feel safe to the point where they're not carrying weapons in order to feel like that's their only way to have safety. Okay. And I think that is it for now, but happy to answer any questions here.
Thank you, Director. We got a couple other agencies to get through. Next is the City Solicitor's Office. We'll come back. The Department of Transportation.
Mr. Chair, Liam Davis, representing Baltimore City Department of Transportation. In our bill report, we mentioned some of the steps we've done to kind of address some of the concerns related to stolen vehicles. Last January 22 of 2022, we changed the practice and we are no longer requiring that victims of stolen vehicles pay the towing fees associated with the impound lot. I stand here ready to address any specific questions. I do want to mention, though, that when our TEOs do go out and they're doing their routine parking patrol, when their handhelds or their license plate readers do pick up a stolen vehicle, they will report that to BPD, and we'll wait up to 20 minutes for BPD to arrive. And then when they're closing out their shift, they will file a form that mentions any stolen autos that they did report that day.
Thank you. In light of the fees for towing and storage being waived for victims, what about in instances when stolen vehicles get automated tickets, red light and speed tickets?
Yeah, so in my experience, when those are reported, I've had a few reported from your offices or like our state partners. We'll verify with our parking enforcement team, BPD, and finance department. And if it's determined that the tickets were issued erroneously during, or they may have been issued correctly when it was stolen, but we will waive it if it is in fact happening when the car was not driven by them.
Awesome, thank you. We do not have the state's attorney. We don't have the state's attorneys here, not today. Unfortunately, they weren't able to make it to today's hearing and for the next hearing after this. Sheriff's Office.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Kevin Hayes, Chief of Staff for the Baltimore City Sheriff's Office. Our office is a full-service law enforcement agency with citywide jurisdiction. We recently just purchased a tow truck and are working with the MOU with the Department of Transportation, so that way we can assist with abandoned vehicles, many which have been found to be stolen. We are also training our deputies to do so as well, and we've also enhanced some of our traffic safety. Every time we engage with any type of vehicle, we always run to see if the tags are stolen, and we're going to help with that as well. We are a small agency and have the ability to help. We want to be more engaged in the public and law enforcement activity, and are hoping that the mayor and council can help fund that so that way we can be a bigger ally in this. Anything that is needed, we are more than willing to help. The sheriff himself said he wants to be a larger partner than the two sheriffs before him.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So that is it for agency reports. I don't think I've forgotten anybody. We're going to go into questions from the committee. I'm going to start off with the sponsor, Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question will be, I'm going to start with the Deputy Director of the Department of Juvenile Services, and thank you for joining us. Just speaking as a father, as a former middle school teacher, as a council member who passed legislation related to childhood trauma, I am deeply concerned about the amount of young people who are going in and out of our criminal justice system, and particularly just some really alarming recidivism rates. Specifically, when it comes to car-related crimes, we're seeing about a 45% rearrest rate within a year after a crime has been committed. And I appreciate you sharing the detailed process and all of the statistics on outcomes, but these rearrest rates are extremely alarming. And we're seeing it in our neighborhoods. We're seeing it in all of our communities around carjackings and car thefts. We know that when young people are quickly held accountable and when there are follow-up services and a high level of accountability, that recidivism is reduced. And I think we've seen that in previous slides. Speaking specifically to what is within DJS's control, what changes, in your opinion, are necessary to improve the intake process and improve accountability overall within the system?
Thank you. And I share your concern. I've been in this field for 20-some years. I actually have worked for the last 25 around issues of race, equity, and inclusion. And so understanding that serving communities, particularly communities of color, can be difficult because of resource needs and the lack thereof. Infrastructure, environmental, social factors all come into play. That does not mean that you cannot hold youth accountable. I think that we are seeing a uptick throughout in the country around auto theft and carjackings, particularly across the board for both adult and juveniles. In terms of what can be done and what should be done, I agree with you that expediency is important because young people have a certain window. As adolescents, their processing requires you to have an immediate response, as well as one that's effective. And so in terms of what we can and are planning to do is, again, when cases are resolved, no response is a response as well, and it's not a great one. So wanting to push more towards resolving with services, but also having targeted pre-court. When I say targeted pre-court, what are we doing and what are the best practices in the country around auto theft reduction? What are some of the things that are the drivers of young people, whether it's those who are doing it for financial purposes, those who are just joyriding? At the end of the day, they are creating quite a bit of difficulty for victims and doing quite a bit of harm around stealing vehicles. But the response has to be more than just solely let's hold them accountable, locking them up, because they're going back into the community. So I and my staff are faced daily with trying to figure out how to work collaboratively with community to expand our resource continuum, to work more closely. Like, we also have a relationship with We Out Us. We have a targeted initiative around gun violence, kids who are at the highest risk of gun violence involvement, either as those who are shot or those who are the shooters. We need something similar for auto theft. And so we're actually looking and seeing what's happening in the country where they're having good outcomes. Cook County, which is Chicago, Illinois, they have a model. So as not to do rebuild the wheel, we have to figure out what works, how it works, and more importantly, how can we replicate it, and replicate it in concert with not just DJS, but working with community. Kids are best treated in the spaces in which they live. And so we want to be able to have a community-based response. We want to start using restorative practice more, so because that is an immediate response. That is a victim looking a young person in the eye saying, this is how I was impacted. This is why I want you to take responsibility for what you did. So trying to do more restorative sessions, and that does not mean that we won't involve a youth formally in our system, but we want victims to have a voice and have an opportunity to weigh in, and as well as help us co-construct a solution. So again, I agree with you that there is a lot that we need to do to be expeditious, but we also have to be very innovative in addressing the actual behavior, and that's getting to why is it happening and what are some of the ways that we can prevent it from happening through community-based programming for probation kids, pre-court kids, as well as aftercare kids. We have kids on all levels of involvement with us who are exhibiting this behavior, so making sure that it's comprehensive.
I appreciate that. I will just say that I think time is really of the essence. I think that in spending a lot of time, and I know my colleagues do as well, in talking to victims of violent crimes, there is not a feeling of accountability or any sort of restoration happening. In fact, it feels just the opposite. Folks feel like the systems are dropping the ball and allowing children to slip through the cracks, and there is not a clear follow-up process. So I wanted to ask, sort of in that regard, and this is a question for you all, but Monse and the police department as well, One of the things I'm concerned about is there seems to be multiple disparate efforts and a lack of central coordination between city and state agencies on the connected issues of car thefts and juvenile justice. And appreciated Director Mavronis here, seeing what you all are doing. But it does seem like there are some parallel efforts happening, and there needs to be centralization. There was a reference in the mayor's updated car theft strategy to new interagency meetings between BPD, DJS, and MONSE, for example, as one of several. Can each agency articulate your strategy for how agencies will engage with each other and how agencies can collaborate on the juvenile booking and intake process, and just make sure that we are working in one accord so that it doesn't feel like it's felt recently, which is that there's disconnectedness and finger pointing going on?
Sure, and thanks for that, Councilman. What you referenced in the mayor's strategy, I think, relates specifically to what Lisa was just talking about. When we're thinking about some of these models that we're seeing work for other populations of people, we know we have a challenge. We know we're seeing a lot of, in many cases, repeat offenders when it comes to the issue of auto theft or carjacking. This is something that actually came up recently in a police set meeting. We were having the conversation with BPD, and I'd be happy for them to talk more about that. Like, where are those points in the process map where, one, let's make sure we actually have an interagency process map, and in some cases, we're at the table together developing that. So while there may be a lead agency on a specific initiative, I am personally, especially since the start of this governor's administration, seeing a newfound interest in sitting together, coming to the table, and partnering from local to state, which I think gives us the opportunity to quickly make some progress on this issue. What we're looking forward to is making sure that in as many spaces as we're having this conversation on the local level, that we're making sure that DJS is at the table, and that we're looking very carefully about how we can tap into each other's programs. Because I think in the past few years, our agency's been building a lot at the demonstration level, showing that GVRS can work if we fund it appropriately and we provide the right kind of service provision, and we bring in life coaches and we think about that side of the work in addition to enforcement. Now what we need to do is figure out where those other gaps are in our system, which we've started to see, and make sure that we can effectively work together. So I think at a local level, for our part, and to answer your question specifically, MONSE will continue to play a role as an interagency coordinator at the local level, but we can't do it without our state partners being at the table. And similarly, when those initiatives are happening at the state level, we also have to be at the table to make sure that there's not gaps between our programming.
And
Yep, good morning, good afternoon. And as for BPD, yes, I agree there is room for interagency collaboration. We've already seen that. We've had that on small levels. Of course, us and MONSE have been on multiple fronts, whether it is victim assistance, whether it was post-Brooklyn, whether it's in reference to our GVRS strategy. Us and MONSE have always been collaborative partners in reference to moving forward. I would say in regards to DJS, this has also been a work in progress, but we have been at the table with DJS. We have had them several times to come to our ComStat to speak to our commanders, Lisa Reynolds specifically. We have recently had a meeting with DJS, MONSE, BPD in reference to the commitment and GPS services that are provided through DJS. So we're actually kicking the table on everything because we have seen those gaps, but we are working collaboratively with it. We are right now in the stages of setting another meeting on a Tuesday, a non-police stat Tuesday with DJS, for them to give the whole command of BPD a PowerPoint on their GPS in their electronic monitoring system. So we do realize that there are gaps in it, but we're working as strongly as possible to close those gaps, because sometimes until the system is kicked, you don't realize that there is a problem and that there is someone falling into the river. The problem is we need to get better of getting them out the river and finding out where they're falling in. That's where this process is, of where those gaps are prior to them falling in, prior to it being a situation. This collaboration that we have now and this open atmosphere for it is refreshing to BPD, and we're happy to be a part of that.
I want to emphasize some of what both my partners shared, and this is a moment of transparency. Under our current secretary, Vincent Schiraldi, myself, I'm new in my appointment, as well as our entire executive team. We all had our start in community, and what I will say is that in previous, I've been with several other administrations. We have not always come to the table as partners. We have not always come to the tables authentically with the desire to share our information, to go through our processes, and more importantly, allow someone to poke holes into our process. Just because we are Department of Juvenile Services does not mean that we have every single answer. And so being able to be transparent, to work with our partners, to share our processes, get input about those processes, that's going to be a key part of what we do. We also need to have shared consensus and value, sharing values, going back often to say what are our values here, where do we have agreements and where do we have disagreements, and how can we work in spite of. And so that is part of any collaborative process. And finally, I would just say resource sharing. We have at our disposal a number of resources, as do our partner agencies. How do we share that? We're serving the same community. We're serving the same kids, the same families, for the most part, across agencies. So how do we share those resources and do so where we're doing a lot of early intervention as opposed to awaiting a crisis that results in an arrest? And so we are very committed to working closely with our Baltimore City partners, police, and MONSE, specifically in different departments of the mayor's office for the first time in quite a while since I've been with the agency. So that is part of the work of showing up, being authentic, bringing our resources to the table, not being overly sensitive about the things that we're not doing correctly, and being open to have the processes, policies, procedures, and programming vetted thoroughly with our partners and by community. Oftentimes we have hearings like this, and who's always missing? Youth, young people, families. So what are we doing to include them? Because we can have a lot of ideas about auto theft, but are we having those conversations with them? First of all, why are you doing it? And what do you need to come out of that as an activity, because it's harmful and it's dangerous both to yourself and to community. So being able to work more inclusively with young people to help to get their feedback and let them, quote unquote, put some skin in the game. This is what you say you wanted to commit yourself to. So
I appreciate that. Could I just ask a quick follow-up before passing to my colleagues? Had a good meeting just today with Commissioner Worley. We talked about sort of the next steps and follow-up, and I appreciate that you all are meeting specifically around the GPS monitoring, knowing that that has been an enormous challenge. The mayor talks about it a lot. I wanted to ask, though, and Commissioner seemed very willing to participate, whether there could be a specific follow-up between leadership within BPD, DJS, and possibly MONSE as well, specifically related to this issue of intake and the accountability that comes with that. Like I said, Commissioner seemed, fair to say, Aaron, very willing to participate, and so wanted to ask DJS and MONSE whether that's something you all would commit to participating in as well.
Of course.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Councilman. Question I had was actually for the law department. I see Hillary's just walking in. It's my understanding this whole sort of fad we're seeing with car thefts, particularly around Kias and Hyundais, it's all related to a challenge on TikTok or how-to video on TikTok. And that's then been shared on TikTok and Instagram. Is there any way that we can hold those companies accountable to recoup some of the costs that the city has taken on in order to mitigate the impacts of car thefts?
Elena DePietro from the Baltimore City Law Department. I mean, we have not really had a chance to review that question. And it didn't occur to us when we looked at the resolution, but I mean, there would definitely be issues regarding federal communication law, as well as trying to regulate the speech of those who use TikTok based on a specific subject matter as opposed to just generally limiting TikTok's activities. So off the top of my head, I would say no, that there would be constitutional problems as well as perhaps federal law problems.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And are we thinking of any other creative ways to recoup the additional expenses that we have incurred from this spike?
You know, off the top of my head, I don't have any ideas right now. I certainly could get back to you after talking it over with colleagues in the law department, and so we'd happy to do that.
Yeah, I would appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you, Elena. And my colleague touched on this earlier. One, I want to say I appreciate all the folks that are here, and I think we're going to continue to have this conversation both for this hearing and the one that immediately follows this, and outside of this room, because it's incredibly important that we address this issue. And no individual agency is going to be able to do it on its own. The city can't do it on its own. DGS cannot do it on its own. I have heard anecdotally a number of instances, as my colleague has alluded to, of where young people in particular are captured from stealing a car, but then still end up back on the streets time and time and time again, such that it has been half a dozen or a dozen times. I'm curious if we have a sense for why or how that happens, given the process that we have today, and if there are changes we should be thinking about or considering, noting the new challenges with the ease of stealing Hyundais and Kias today.
So for youth being presented to DJS and speaking to the issue of chronicity, those are the kids who are, they get arrested, they come before us, even if they get detained or they get re-released or pre-court for whatever reason. Again, our objective decision-making tool it's our blueprint, but it's not the decision maker. Our staff, our intake staff are the ones who make those decisions, and we consider a number of both mitigating and aggravating factors. For the young person who continues to come back, if they still are pending charges, they continue to get, that is something that we look at that has a weight or point value on the detention screen. So the more chronic offenses they have, the more, the higher their score will be. So they may start out being released because they show that low risk. They may appear for court. The court may release them because we make one decision and then the court has the option to continue it the next business day should it choose to do so. But if there is a issue of chronicity, our recommendations are not solely about our detention risk assessment instrument, but also our intake tool, as well as doing an assessment of risk and resiliency for young people once their facts are sustained in the case, which means that they come to us and we have to do a social history, and so we'll look more comprehensively at their background and their services. Unfortunately, the amount of the chronicity of offenses is an issue. It's been an issue for a number of cases, a number of types of cases. I remember a time when there was CDS possession. Now it's auto theft, and so we are trying to develop again not only solutions for post-adjudication for kids who are under active court supervision, but having something that has much more teeth in it for pre-court, as well as to try to address the population before there is continued engagement. So being able to develop a response to that is our challenge, quite frankly.
I appreciate that. I want to sort of clarify, because I think my interpretation of what I've been hearing in these anecdotal instances have been sort of this feeling that our young people are let out, and not only are they not held accountable because they are young, and we certainly don't want to throw our young people in jail for making a mistake early on, but the impression is that they're also not receiving services such that they end up time and time again recommitting the same crimes. And it just so happens that this is the big one. It's the car thefts. I'm curious, to your best understanding, is there a way, given our process, that can be the case? And if so, I mean, you can answer that question.
Sure. There's always a way to address certain behavior, try to ward it off as a means of early intervention. I'm thinking back to work that we've done before around shoplifters, and I know that's a different offense than auto theft and definitely carjacking, but doing services that that target specific behaviors and addresses certain specific behaviors as an intervention is something that can be considered a dose. So when we think about, the perception that kids aren't held accountable, I go back to what does accountability look like, and that we all define that a bit differently. For some, it's punishment. For others, it's treatment. For us, it's treatment. So we do have the ability to, if we're able to work with our partners to identify a service, i.e. a program, an intervention that allows us to engage young people, and the more that we have active order to engage young people, and it's not voluntary, the more effective and the more long-term it likely could be. So we would like to consider our options to do specialized pre-court, specialized probation for certain offenses, because again, it's not, accountability comes because of the dosage, and the dosage has an effect. That's the point.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Do we keep any numbers or insights for young people that are deferred to resources to tell whether or not those resources are sufficient to deter them from recommitting said crime?
We look at recidivism in terms of the beginning being their involvement with us, under active court order, either as for probation, for example. And once they complete the terms and conditions of that probation, then how long out? 9, 12 months is there a reoffense. That's how we measure our recidivism. It's not based upon a particular service, but a combination thereof, because youth and young people, they don't just get one thing. They typically get a range of things that speaks to them more holistically in terms of what's needed for education, what's needed for family, what's needed for social circle and social spaces. And so those are some of the things that we consider, and it's hard to say what contributed to the change if we see a change, for good or for bad. But we do track recidivism, and we can do a number of qualitative measures, or qualitative methods rather, to determine are they being responsive to specific interventions to address specific behaviors. We haven't done it, but we do have the resources to do so.
I appreciate that, and I'm going to hand off to my colleagues in a second. I want to hammer this home. So my understanding is, or maybe you can clarify this, there shouldn't be many instances in which we're just letting young people go knowing that there may have been a concern about them committing a crime. They are at the very least tied into some program or resource or something like that, monitoring or whatever the case is by DJS. And that's correct, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and then as far as those resources, whether or not we're seeing, them not recommit crimes or reoffend, we do keep track of that.
We do have that data, and we just had a meeting this morning at our CD office, and one of the things that I reported, and it's going to start being part of our data resource guide, is that we have a very high success rate for kids who are under community detention with and without electronic monitoring for pre-adjudicated cases, as well as even reporting center kids. We have over a 95% success rate of kids who actually appear for court and do so without reoffending. However, if they appear for court and they are they're given probation, and they reoffend again, that is a form of recidivism. And so it's a different measure once they're under active supervision. But we do track the outcomes for young people who are released on our community detention program. And one of the misconceptions that we have that I would like us to do a more comprehensive job in explaining the different ways that kids are released. Because police see them the next business day does not mean it has not been a response from us. It does not mean that they could have an ankle monitor on. They could be in community detention. They could be in the evening reporting center. So our intention is to ensure our accountability once they're at the stage of pre-adjudication is to ensure that they get to court. once they are under our active supervision, is to ensure that they stay out of delinquent behavior and that they complete the terms and conditions of their court order. So.
Okay. I think it'd be really helpful for the committee if you're able to fashion that data on instances where we've worked with them, we've got them in some program, and seeing whether or not they're actually end up back in some criminal activity after that. I think it'd be helpful for us to understand what is and is not working, if certain partnerships or programs are more effective than others, or if certain crimes have more or less a likelihood of recidivism, just so that we're more nuanced. And I'm just very curious. Yeah.
I would be cautious in answering that only
Okay.
because I don't have that data, but also in understanding that there are different reasons why a young person does or does not respond to services. It could be that it could be not only the wrong dose, but it could be the wrong person that the focus is on. It could be the young person when it should be a more holistic focus on family. It could be a number of things that may result in a young person not making that shift or that change. But we are trying to be very mindful of looking at what services we do use and the outcomes. We work with YAP, we work with YOCA. We, Our Us is our latest credible messenger group working for our Thrive Academy, which is our gun violence reduction. And so they could be successful, they may not be. That does not mean that they didn't do what they were supposed to do, but there are so many other factors that contribute to that. So.
Precisely. And I think it's just for me to better understand if there's anything for this council to do, or if there's anything for this council to recommend, our state legislature to do or change, that we can have those conversations with as much data and insight as possible. But I really appreciate that insight. I want to go to my colleagues. I have Councilwoman Porter up next, and then Costello thereafter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to talk through kind of the prevention strategy for these group of young people. Earlier in the year, we had Baltimore City Public Schools share with us about a dashboard that identifies ACEs scores. They identify ACEs scores of young people. My thought is, speaking with constituents in the district, is that, these are the same groups of young people that we are seeing throughout the city that are doing these crimes throughout the city. How are you all kind of wrangling around this particular group of people, providing those intensive services that you're discussing, like from ROCA, from other community-based organizations? My concern, and the reason why I ask that, my concern is that the data that you all are using are not being integrated or not being aggregated in a way that provides a comprehensive strategy for us to move forward. So everybody's moving forward in their respective silos, and the data is not the data that you all are using with regard to kind of like saying, we have this amount of recidivism, this amount of people that are coming back into our communities. We're not talking. The data is not talking, and it's not being reflective of the comprehensive public safety strategy that we need throughout this city. And so that question is for DJS, that question is for Monty and the administration.
So, and we agree the need for data sharing. Because we have one part of the story, police department has the beginning part of the story, Monzi has a picture about the community and family, and how do we make all of those data systems speak to each other to inform our process. That begins with us first understanding the opportunities to collaborate and being able to have a focus on when do we intervene. We're looking at kids who are in schools and they are demonstrating significant problems that are of concern to school as well as community and thereby for us. If we could avoid kids coming to us by way of an offense, we would like to. But again, at what point do we intervene, and at what point, through what agency is going to be somewhat like the gatekeeper? To say, now we have this young person, and I think that the mayor's office has a really good model actually through the intensive family case management that we're participating in, because that's a way to put a lens on a young person at an early stage who is at risk of being involved in delinquency, and being able to wrap around that young person, not just services, but the agencies are wrapping around in terms of making sure if he or she has any DJS involvement, DSS DSS involvement. The school is already there because that becomes that's there to gatekeeper. So how do we leverage that relationship and develop a shared data model for that? And so I don't have an answer to when we would get there, but that is how we would at least enter into that kind of agreement through a shared collaborative.
And the only reason why I bring that up, Stephanie, before you go into your response, some of the data points that you mentioned in the presentation were particularly alarming. When we have 57.32 of other being dismissed, null pros, or denied by the state's attorney, we have 97, and that includes the 97% that's referred to the state's attorney. So my question, my emphasis is really on the urgency of said process, but also, MONSE, the City Council provides a significant amount of funding as it relates to how you all do processes as far as community engagement, neighborhood engagement, and what success metrics are you all using, if not this, to develop your planning?
So I think when we're talking about data sharing for juvenile offenders, some of the challenges come in what can be shared for youth under the age of 18. I think Dr. Brooks is in the room, and I would love for her to talk about some of the progress that she and her team have been able to make in that realm. I think it's going to allow us to do exactly what you just said, because that has been a missing piece, and without getting over the data hurdle, sometimes the thing that makes the most sense, which would be for all of us to be coordinating, sharing information about cases, is prevented by law. And so I think we've been able to find a path forward, and that's something I'd ask Dr. Brooks to speak to directly.
And is that state law or city law?
It's state law.
State law.
State.
Good afternoon, Dr. Deborah Brooks, Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success. So just as you've heard my partners say, we have been working diligently on creating an MOU with our shared partners, DJS, DSS, city schools, as well as BPD and the Mayor's Office, to be able to have an intensive case management. And those are for young people ages 7 through 21 that have been involved in either been the victim of gun violence, the perpetrator of gun violence, or siblings or family members or persons that live in a household that have been involved. And what we know is by working with all of these agencies collectively, we're able to be proactive and provide interventions and services and wraparound supports for the young person, also for the families, and also for the schools where these young people are engaged in. And so I've also been able to participate on multiple work groups with DJS to really talk about where the gaps are. So where are some of the gaps where we're missing, but most importantly, who's not at the table? As you heard Deputy Secretary say, we've also had the state's attorney the state's attorney's office who's been involved in these conversations. We've talked extensively about some of our partners. ROCA has been there as well as We Are Us. And we will be actually beginning to implement this intensive case management in November, but also making sure that we're not missing any children. So as we receive referrals, if there are young people that are currently part of DJS, we're able to talk with DJS to say, this person was just referred. We want to make sure that you have captured this young person so that we can make sure those supports are in place. Or if this young person is referred and had ever received any type of services from DJS, what worked, what didn't work, so that we can make sure that we have the correct type of supports in place for the young person.
Do we have, Mr. Chairman, I ask a follow-up question? Thank you. Do we have a timeline on when that plan will be developed?
The intensive case management plan is developed.
Is in November, but I'm
Yes.
talking about for DJS. Do we have a timeline?
No, we are participating, though, in the process. We just signed on as a signatory to the MOU, and so making sure that we are at the table and understanding what the data that we can share and that which we cannot share. But because of it being the Baltimore City school system, we can share a great deal of information as that's another public entity.
And so with regards to a strategy or any kind of outcomes, when can we as the council expect to see some sort of success related to the true reduction of these auto thefts within the city using this model?
I would like to, it's hard to say what that, because I want you to say more. I think that we need more conversation about what you deem is to be success, because that would determine how long it would take to get to a particular outcome. Ideally, it is that they stop committing offenses. And I think that's the piece. And so reducing the number of chronic offenders. Those are the kids who come back over and over and over again for either the same offenses or more progressive and serious offenses. Is it a matter of them no longer engaging in a particular behavior? So I think being able to define success creates a space for us to talk about how long it would take to address certain behaviors.
That's a fair question, specifically focusing on the chronic offenders that you just mentioned. How many of those do you have within that data that we just mentioned?
I wouldn't know that right now at this moment, but I can go back to our research team for the auto theft and the carjacking, and I can find out how many of those kids have had prior contacts within a certain window of time. A chronic offender is somebody who will come back within a shorter amount of time, as opposed to a youth who has done well, been off probation, and then got rearrested. So I can get that information.
And the reason why I asked that question, because Mr. Chair, directly, yes, sir, I will wrap it up. It directly goes back to your question about the instrument assessment that we talked about earlier. So if we have that level of chronic repeat offenses within the program currently, really reimagining how we utilize that assessment, how we are engaging and or really evaluating that assessment is going to be pretty crucial. If that's the first stop in order for a young person or their parent to come into DJS, that instrument needs to be reassessed. If that's the first stop that we are evaluating how those chronic repeat offenders are coming back into the system. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll save my questions for the next round.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I want to acknowledge Councilman Glover, who's joined the meeting, and I want to hand off to Councilman Costello for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's about intake for DJS. So right now, law and policy requires the arresting officer to bring a juvenile to the Baltimore City Juvenile Justice Center. At the Juvenile Justice Center, a formal process is supposed to take place with a risk assessment based on the statement of charges. That is not how it is happening in practice. Instead, officers are making a phone call to a DJS intake officer who is off-site or at home to informally review a statement of charges and make a determination as to whether to detain the juvenile pending a formal determination of charges. In this case, there's a workaround to the process prescribed by law because there is no opportunity to appeal an intake officer's decision not to detain a juvenile who has committed a very serious or violent offense. This informal process with DJS intake officers not being on site at the Juvenile Justice Center is creating greater harm in the city and the state and shouldn't be permitted. Can DJS explain, please?
Yes, just recently, less than 36 hours ago, I just had a conversation, and that is something that will be changing in our Baltimore City intake office in terms of the entire point of the Justice Center being a collaborative of all the juvenile justice agencies is that they're there to work together. And so we are aware and concerned about the lack of on-site staff in order to engage with police in real time and talk through cases. And so that's something that we are addressing looking to resolve within a week. So
that policy will become effective in a week?
Right, it's not so much a policy as it is practice. A lot of our staff went to a telework schedule as a result of the pandemic, and bringing people back into offices is a plan for the entire state. But because DJS's Baltimore City intake is also the state's centralized intake division, that means that it's a 24/7 operation, and I need staff available 24/7.
So irrespective of if we define it as policy or practice, starting on or before November 15th of 2023, there will be a DJS human being that is located at the Juvenile Justice Intake Center 24/7 to physically review a statement of charges in person prior to the release of a juvenile. Is that correct?
That's correct, including on weekends. And just as a point of clarification, we do have staff that are there during the week, during 24/7 operation. However, those who are making decisions or approving decisions are the supervisors, and those are the ones who are being brought back into the space on Monday through Sunday, because it is a 24/7 operation. That is effective November the 15th, when we are making a number of changes.
And that change to either policy or practice, that will be, I assume, memorialized in a memo to staff and supervisors?
Yes, we begun to have that conversation. We started with our HR, with our Human Resources Department, just to ensure that was clear, because it's a 24/7 operation, that we were able to make that requirement. And it is a 24/7 operation. It's treated as a critical operation.
And has that memo been produced and transmitted to supervisors and staff yet?
Not at this moment, not at this moment. We're in the process of doing that now.
Once that memo is produced and transmitted, is that something that you could share with the committee?
Yes, we can share it with the committee, and we also plan to share it with our partners, because we also want juvenile booking to know who their supervisors are for intake at any given time, at any point of the day. So they will actually know the schedule of the supervisors who are able to, who approve many of the decisions.
And just to button this up, Mr. Chair, that memo will be provided to the council by, I assume, no later than November 15th, 2023?
Yes, and I will check with our council about that.
I'm good. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. I want to welcome Councilman Stokes to the meeting. We are going to move into public testimony. I understand folks are here who want to testify. So if you wish to testify online, please use the raise hand function. For those that are here in person, you'll have 2 minutes as well. First, I have Paulette Carroll. Paulette, you can please, you can step forward. You got 2 minutes. Please state your name again for the record, and use the button on the right to turn on the microphone. Please use the button on the right. There we go. And it'll turn on the light. There we go.
Hi, my name is Paulette Curl. I'm the president of Towns of the Towers. And I live in the Towers. My community has been hit so hard from 2020 up until now with teenagers going crazy. And no one has done anything about them. They vandalism, Walgreens, MeQ, Center West. 20 of our renters had moved on their own. Doors had been kicked in, even mine. I have been violated, and I'm not moving from where I've been for 14 years. It's sad that the police don't come out. It's sad no one are holding the kids accountable for what they are doing. And the parents are right along with them. What are y'all gonna do with these kids? Because these are not our average kids now. We living in a new world now. And it's so much going on, but nothing is being done. Center West lost over $100,000 from them breaking in their apartment, breaking windows, doing all sorts of things. No one got held accountable for anything. Are anyone going to come up with a solution? Because these kids have no sense of danger, and they don't care about ending anyone's life. When you look into their eyes, what I seen when they attacked me, I had a gun pointed to my face for someone stealing a bike out my yard. I had teenagers threw knives at me, kicking in my door because I'm reporting what's right in my community. What are we going to do? I need your help. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Costello, I understand this is in your district.
Yes, Ms. Paulette, I want to thank you for your leadership in the community, for coming out today. And I just want everyone in this room to be aware that when we received this memo from DJS on November 15th, that will be the last day of operations of the Walgreens at 312 North MLK Jr. Boulevard, which has been plagued by juvenile crime. which means the communities I represent in Heritage Crossing and then Towns and the Terraces in Northeast Poppleton will be without a pharmacy because collectively we haven't done enough to get this situation under control. So I want everyone to be aware of the impact of November 15th and why that's a very important date to me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Next up, we've got Audrey Carter. The right button on the right. And state your name again for the record.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I apologize that I'm not used to coming to these kind of meetings, but I hear it's very informative. Hello to everyone, and especially my councilperson, Councilman Stokes. I am here for twofold reasons. I actually am a surviving victim of a young person who actually took the life of my one and only son. But I'm also here as an advocate, and I have been for years for young people. And so when I hear about these young people, kind of committing all these crimes, my first instinct is why? What is happening? For me, it is not that they just, woke up and say, oh, I'm gonna steal a car, I'm gonna shoot somebody, I'm gonna do this. At some point, it was a long succession. So I actually found out about this meeting, and I said I wanted to come, if nothing else, but to say that, yes, we should hold our young people accountable, as well as we should also hold ourselves accountable. Because I'm not only a mom who lost her only son, but I'm a grandmother and also a school teacher, Head Start, community advocate, definitely, in the community. But at some point, we failed our young people of training them up. And I'm also a church leader as well. So when we talk about training up our children in the way they should go, so that when they get older, they won't depart from it, we failed them. So when we send them to school, there should have been some teachers, some administrators, somebody saying a child didn't come to school, where are they? They're having difficulty problems, they have behavioral problems. So before they get to 16 and 17, somebody should have been some kind of gatekeeper guard. And then I also say, again, I'm a grandmother. I'm very involved with my grandchildren lives, definitely since their parents passed, since my son passed. But at the same time, I'm not, people don't call me. I am very much involved in their life. I am very much an influencer of their behavior and things, and holding them accountable. But as a family person, I wasn't involved. So my thought is, again, to discuss with families, not just parents, but also grandparents. That would be important to hold our young people accountable, as also to hold them responsible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Next up, we have Rashad Wilson.
Hello, everyone. So I'm not Rashad. Rashad had to leave, had to pick up his girlfriend from work. So Rashad is a student from Beats Not Bullets that came to speak today. I do apologize.
If you could state your name for the record.
I do apologize he wasn't able to wait. My name is Kevin Beasley, and I'm the current director of Beats Not Bullets. We are a community program nonprofit where we bring studio equipment into schools, prisons, and things of that nature. But very briefly, I don't know who I'm speaking to, but I hope that it lands on someone's ears. We were a recipient of one of the grants for sidestep diversion, which is why Rashad was here. I just want to stress the fact that when there's any break in between the time of when we're able to engage them, and then now we're kind of waiting for funds, and I get it, and I understand it, and I respect it. But those breaks are very, very important because he is the definition of a high-risk youth. But everyone that was referred, that showed up, was retained. They haven't, well, I'm not gonna say they haven't broke the law, I don't know what but they haven't been, they haven't been recharged for anything or booked for anything since Beats Not Bullets. And then more importantly, what I'm seeing on my end is if we put retention on the back end of the program, so we give them free studio sessions. Rashad in particular called me, his brother was murdered maybe 2 weeks ago, and instead of really retaliating and like just not caring about his reactions, he called me and just wanted to get into the studio. I met him there. We kind of just surround him with food, music, and let him cry, right? So I guess what I'm really trying to get to is that the breaks in between the funding are a very big hazard as far as the work that we're attempting to do. And if our name is new, as far as anyone in the room, Beats Not Bullets should be invested in. I think we do great work, and it's something that they want to come back to because everybody wants to be in front of a mic. Everybody wants to hear their voice. Everybody wants to make beats when they're in that age group. But I think we're doing great work, and I would love for us to figure out how to not have breaks in that funding as far as those grant cycles, because he hasn't been engaged. He's eligible for free sessions, but he hasn't been engaged in programming, continuing programming since August, but he still showed up today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Beasley. For those that are joining us virtually, if you wish to testify, please use the raise hand function and we'll unmute you. Any folks who are here and wish to testify, before we do so, I want to give Councilman Stokes an opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can say with Audrey Carter and Beats Not Bullets, I know how hard they work in my district, but sometimes we have to look at where we have to go to make this clear that we got to hold our young people accountable, but we have to have the programs we give to them or present to them. And I'm going to use an example, what Beats Not Bullets, what Audrey do. A friend of mine do a program called We Rise. We go over to Charles Hickey and myself and talk to the young men about their attitude before they get out. The problem is we got a juvenile services program in Annapolis. Todd Scott take the money out of his pocket to make sure we can help our young kids. And sometimes we don't even get a response from juvenile justice about giving the funding, like what Beats and Bullets are talking about, what Ms. Audrey is talking about. There are programs out there, but the gentleman that was talking about the gap, when you can't get no funding, them young people, they trust you, and they come into your place and feel the trust. And once you get a gap, you know what you do? You end up losing them. And he is telling the truth, and I've seen that happen. But we have to hold our young people accountable. But you know where else we need to go and talk about this? We got to go to Annapolis. The police only can do what they can do. We have a General Assembly. And there's nothing wrong with holding them accountable, because I believe that if young people know there are accountabilities to what you do, I believe that our shootings will go down, our murders will go down. But as long as young people know there's no accountability, they keep repeating the same thing over and over and over. But we still have to make sure that those organizations, nonprofits that's really doing the work, do not have a gap in funding. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman, and I couldn't agree with you more. So I want to make sure we give one final opportunity for folks that wish to testify before we move into our next hearing. Actually, we're going to put this to a vote and vote this out of committee. Any other folks looking to testify? Mr. Beasley, very quickly. On the right.
Right. My apologies, and I meant to say this. So the last thing I did want to say is that when it comes to those hard conversations, I think Beats Not Bullets is a good example of that, but we sit them down and have those conversations. I would love whoever's in the room that would love to ask the questions and get the raw answers of why this, why that, why that. Like, I swear that would be a
I would love to talk to you at the end of this.
I would love to talk to you as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That concludes our, Councilman, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to kind of piggyback off some things that Councilman Stokes has said, and these are the things that are really important to me, to us. I think what we have done was we have failed our children due to the fact that rec centers are closed. Those buildings are not there any longer. And what I've witnessed is that This year, I bust my butt along with the Bro-East community, along with Councilman Stokes, and we opened up a rec center that was closed for over 7 years. And Rexton Parks didn't have the funding to open that rec center, but what we did was we reached out to organizations that had programming that was able to come in and help our young people in our neighborhoods. Baltimore City, we are failing our young people. And if we're not getting the job right, and if they see that we're acting a fool, and we're not taking them seriously, they're not going to take us seriously. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing our young people acting out in a way that we have never seen this ever before in the city of Baltimore.
Councilman,
our young...
I hate to cut you off. I want to make sure we get to our next hearing, because our next hearing is actually about youth crime. This one is actually about car thefts, and it just so happened that they both have a huge overlap, because a lot of the car thefts that we're seeing today are being predicated by our young
Okay,
people.
Mr. Chair, do that. Thanks.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we put that last opportunity out for public testimony. I see a young woman in the back. Please come to the front, state your name. You turn on the mic with the button on the right, and you've got 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Desiree Clary, and I'm actually here on behalf of friends of mine who had their vehicle stolen right outside of their house. They actually live right around the corner from Councilman Cohen, and I was under the impression that Port Authority would be here to speak. No, that was listed on the announcement. Anyhow, their car is not an easy car. It's not an easy target. It's not a Kia or Hyundai. It's a GMC Denali. And within 10 seconds of entering the vehicle, which was equipped with OnStar, the alarm was cut and they took off. And this car has not been found. There's no indication of where it might be. Our thought process is that it could be on a container ship somewhere heading to a different country. But this is the reason why I wanted to speak to Port Authority to see if there was anything happening at the ports, any sort of corruption happening with allowing these cars to enter into the port and be taken to another country. But I don't.
Unfortunately, the Port Authority is not here for this meeting.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing that I keep hearing is this TikTok challenge, and I don't know about anybody here, but I grew up in the 1900s, right? I'm sure most of us have. And if we had TikTok in the 80s, 70s, 60s, I'm not one to, go and think about stealing a car after watching a TikTok video. I don't know. We've got to address the root cause of why these children are doing these things, these crimes. I'm a mother of 3. My biggest fear is being carjacked with my children in the car. And what am I supposed to do when 6 to 8 youth surround my car? What am I supposed to do? I can't fight back. What if they shoot me? What if they hurt me? What are my children supposed to do? We need to stop this and hold these kids accountable. And I understand wanting to give them services and rehabilitate them, but they have to be punished as well. This cannot go on. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. We are going to go to a vote, and we're going to move on to the next hearing because we have a lot to discuss, including some of this in a different context. So with that, I'm going to entertain a motion on this bill.
Motion to move the bill.
So moved. Second by Porter. Conway, yes. Cohen?
Yes.
Porter? Porter?
Yes.
And Glover? Yes. This bill will move to second reader. Thank you for folks who are here for the first hearing. We're going to move on to our second hearing about juvenile crime and our oversight hearing for the department. I want to recognize, I apologize, the Secretary of the MVA. Nice. Excuse me, if everyone can quiet down for a second. If everyone can quiet down for a second, please. Please have a seat. Excuse me, in the center aisle. Excuse me. Excuse me, ma'am. You mind? Just, we're still in session right now. I just want to acknowledge the MVA Secretary who's on the line, Nizer, Secretary Nizer. Thank you for joining us. Unfortunately, we didn't have any questions for you at the moment. We are going to very quickly move on to our next hearing because we ran over a little bit. And so we'll jump right into it. The next hearing is LO 22-0030, Crime Reduction and Violence Prevention, specifically focused on juvenile crime, for the purpose of the committee holding regular hearings with the Police Department, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, and other agencies to monitor the progress of the city's crime reduction and violence prevention efforts. This bill was introduced on December 5th, 2022, by myself. We did already get into a lot of discussion around juvenile crime, juvenile violence, a lot of the safety issues around our young people in the city. The hope was to bring everybody in the room. Unfortunately, we don't have everybody here, but it is the commitment of myself and I'm sure my colleagues on this committee that we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that we address the concerns that folks brought up in testimony here today. My colleague alluded to earlier some finger pointing, and ultimately we're here to solve problems. And we have a significant problem with our young people. Maybe they don't have the resources, maybe the accountability isn't there, but that's part of what we want to discuss today. And I'm really fortunate to have DJS here to help us understand the process and how they partner with the city. And of course, our city agencies here to help us frame the problem and what resources we're putting out there to help our young people stay on the right track. And for those that are not on the right track, to get them back on the right track. So with that, I am actually going to turn over to BPD, and they're going to walk us through their quarterly crime stats, and then, monthly crime stats, and then we'll get into it.
Good afternoon, Deputy Commissioner Jones. Going over the first slide, significant arrests in reference to adults through the central booking facility. We're showing right now over 1,200 arrests for narcotics violations, 1,200 arrests for handgun violations, 393 arrests for robberies, 173 arrests for attempted murder, and 84 for murder as of the 5th of this month. Next slide, please. So in reference to gun-related violence, what we're showing right now is comparatively where we are in 2023, showing 1,281 handgun violations. That's 9% down compared to last year. In reference to those, 1,231 guns were made by our patrol division, and 90 of those guns were made by non-patrol entities. This is something that we look at every day. The below calendar chart shows where the districts are in comparison from 2020, year-to-date 2023 and 2022. We see some districts that are above where they were last year, others that were not where they're supposed to. I'm not going to say not where they're supposed to be. We realize that handgun violations is something that is fluid. It has to do with, of course, with reasonable articulable suspicion, probable cause, characteristics of an armed person. Some of these handgun violations are subsequent to search and seizure warrants. So we do realize that it is a number that we use as a metrics. We know that a lot of gun violence occurs in Baltimore City. So when we see the increased enforcement in handgun violations, it is something that directly impacts the violence that the city is seeing, which we see the impacts of that on our homicide and our non-fatal shooting reductions for this year. Next slide. Citywide crime overview year to date. As I just spoke to, we're 21% down in reference to homicides. We're 7% down in reference to non-fatal shootings. 17% down for rape. Carjackings are down 21%. Commercial robberies are down 10%. Robbery totals, a decrease of 1%, but this is something that we have struggled with as we've spoken about. We know that right now our street robberies and some of our other commercial, our citywide robbery patterns have been plaguing us. So this is something that we are robustly going after with our district commanders and identifying those problematic areas in geographies, as well as victimology and suspectology, working with not only our citywide robbery, but district detectives in reference to identifying the methodology of where these individuals are operating, the high days and high crimes, and then trying to deploy a robust deployment in reference to crime suppression to prevent and solve these crimes. Aggravated assaults, we are down 5%. Burglaries, we are down 6%. When it comes to the rest of the criteria, as you can see, larceny from autos are up 31. Larceny total is up 14%. Stolen autos, we are up significantly for a percentage point of 227%. Common assaults, we're up 5.5%, and arsons, we are up 30%. Next slide. Domestic and youth violence, as you can see, I'll only really go over the categories where we're showing red in the interest of time. We have seen, in reference to our domestic and youth violence, an increase of 300% in reference to non-fatal shootings. There has been a 7% increase in our rapes, as well as a 50% increase in our arsons. As it goes to the youth violence, the shootings have been up 36%. Our robbery commercials involving youth have been up 100%. Robberies up 90%. Burglaries up 26%. Larcenies 36%. Auto thefts 200%. Common assaults 11%, and arsons again up 200%. What we see is the pattern that we've talked about. I think we are well aware and established in reference to how domestic violence plays in this, but the increase, as all of us know of and are here today in reference to these increases, we're seeing that are perpetrated as well as victimized by the youth. Next slide. Juvenile arrests and adult arrests. So we see over the years in reference to from 2018 up to current 2023, we see the increases, or we see the youth that have been arrested for totals across the decades. As of 2023 year to date, we have made over 1,200 arrests in reference to these individuals. There has been some increases that we've seen in reference to those that are between 14 and 17 years of age. The largest portion of that, of course, being the 17% age percentile. Next slide. Juveniles arrest database through DJS, juveniles contacted arrest. This goes over basically the same thing, just an earlier age frame from 9 to 17 of the individuals total that we've arrested throughout the years from 2019 until present. Next slide. Juvenile stolen autos, again, what we're here for today. So we've seen that we've arrested individuals for carjacking and auto thefts year to date, 692. This is a 7% decrease compared to 2022. But what I will also note that is the next column where it says total juveniles arrested, we have increased that by 22% from 2022. Not to say that the increase in that is the panacea, just noting the statistical of 22% from 206 to 253. One thing also of note is looking at our numbers and our statistics, of those juveniles that were arrested, 30 of those individuals have been arrested one or more times that show that these are the 30 individuals that we're looking at as having a high number of recidivism. Next. So slide 9 basically goes over what we were talking about in reference to the make and model of the vehicles that are being stolen. We're showing that of the Hondas, of Honda is as a frequently stolen vehicle of 333, followed by Ford. When it gets down to the Hondas and the Kias, they're in the mix as well. Completed stolen autos by model, Accord and Altima are also at the top of this list in reference to the frequency. Next slide. This is for 2022 in comparison compared to 2021. 22, then it's 2023. As we can see, the increase, it went from, like you said, Hondas, Accords, Fords, to currently we're showing this increase, this dramatic increase for Hondas and Kia. This goes back to what we were talking about in reference to the TikTok videos that basically hit nationwide. It is not only a Baltimore City issue. This has been something that has been plaguing Maryland as a whole, as well as the nation, in reference to the increase of how individuals are overriding the initial security system for these vehicles. I will say that, I know we'll get into it, but as of currently, BPD has given out 3,000 wheel locks in reference to trying to be proactive in this, working with the manufacturers. We also have on the 11th and the 15th of this month 2 large-scale events where we'll be giving out 500 more wheel locks per event for a total of 1,000 events. On the 11th, we will be at Northwood Elementary from 11 to 2, I believe. And then on the 15th, we'll be at Hollinswood Shopping Center from 4 to 7 p.m. The remaining wheel locks that would not be distributed that day will then be distributed throughout all 9 districts for them to do their own distribution campaigns, ensuring that the residents of their districts have the necessary wheel locks in reference to prevention. Next slide. Oh, that is the last slide. We realized that, earlier this week, the mayor and the commissioner spoke in reference to providing updates on ongoing strategies in reference to auto theft. I will say this is something that BPD does not take lightly. The 60% of the stolen autos that are recovered, I will say that we are well aware of these individual recovery locations and are proactively using that in our enforcement strategy as well. I will say to the young lady, I'm not sure if she's still here, I don't think she is, in reference to the Port Authority, we have a monthly meeting with our federal partners. Our last monthly meeting was a couple of weeks ago. I did follow up with my partner at HSI, and HSI would say, based on their evidence, there is nothing to support that the vehicles that are discovered and seized at our ports show a large number of them being stolen autos. Their documentation would show that they are somehow taken from either rental agreements that have been, someone has violated a rental agreement and taken them away, or there's something that has to do with the car dealership itself, but not in fact a large portion of the vehicles that are being stolen are then being recovered and seized at the port right now. Again, we realize that, we are being plagued by this. We know year to date that we've had 692 arrests for stolen autos. Of that 692, 250 of those individuals have been juveniles. So this is something that we're actively doing. I won't go into the prior weekly crime plans of the district, but I did have my staff review this week's crime plan, which is pretty much reminiscent of all the other ones. Each district, to a T, has either one to multiple traffic initiatives, stolen auto or carjacking initiatives going on, if not for every shift, on multiple locations throughout that district, to include not only proactive traffic enforcement, but as well as those recovery site areas that we're also starting to target as well. And that would be our presentation right now, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. We're just going to go through the presentations, and I'll ask my questions at the end.
Yes.
I'll go next to Monty.
We are here to answer questions for this one. We don't have a presentation for this one.
Excellent. Thank you. DJS. I know you guys had a very brief presentation.
Yes, we just have one slide. Okay. Thank you. So I wanted to highlight some of our Baltimore City partnerships that we are working with the police department as well as other community partners, gun violence reduction strategy. So I'm going to go through some of the work that we're doing with some of the funding for Western District sidestep pre-arrest diversion, and really kind of considering how do we actually expand that resource so that we can have expanded diversion to other police districts. So that's been a conversation internally about how to resource that differently, so that we can have a more expansive model of police diversion, pre-arrest diversion through the sidestep program beyond just the Western District. With regards to community detention and GPS, we're doing a number of things. That is now under what we call youth engagement and safety. Youth engagement and safety services. The point is that we're trying to engage kids effectively, as well as ensure their safety. So our community detention program, we're expanding the continuum for multiple levels of supervision, so that kids can be graduated upward for non-compliance, as well as incentivized for compliance to go straight off, to come off of electronic monitoring, for example, onto just regular CD if that is necessary and prudent. We are also partnering with the Baltimore Police Department. Today was the first day we had our meeting to actually take them into our building so that they could see how we actually monitor kids in real time. And I think that Deputy Commissioner Jones and Stephanie agreed that it was a bit eye-opening in terms of the actual operation, and we're going to be doing that for a larger contingency of Baltimore Police officers within the next couple of weeks to dispel misinformation, but to also help people understand, one, the differences between electronic monitoring versus GPS, as well as to see the technology of how we can actually locate kids on the map in no proximity. So just because they're out in the community does not mean they're out there without any level of surveillance whatsoever. Then also we are developing a new component to our evening reporting centers. We are now including a day reporting component, because for the most part, a lot of young people who are not involved in school or vocational training actually need someplace to be during the day for workforce development and other important supports and services. And so we are expanding that continuum as well. And evening reporting centers, that is a part of our alternative to detention continuum. Then we also are working with the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform that's doing the group violence reduction strategy, and they are actually our technical assistance provider in what we have just recently brought online, which is our Thrive Academy. Thrive Academy is an intensive wraparound immediate response to youth who are considered to be at highest risk of being involved in gun violence, either through as a shooter or someone who's being shot. The research shows that young people in Baltimore City are more likely to be shot than to shoot. And so how do we go about keeping them safe and provide supervision for them in the community? And so we had a number of activities that were centered around gun violence reduction that began in the summer and will continue through the entire tenure of our current administration. We did Safe Summer Activities, which was a significant awarding of federal funds to the local management board here in Baltimore City and some providers to provide summer activities for young people. And again, the Thrive Academy, we work with credible messengers who serve as life coaches to kids. They do the direct intervention, knowing that they have lived experience, and they actually form a better relationship with our young people and with our families in terms of information information gained, as well as being able to be trusted by young people to kind of make some of the shifts and the changes in their lives. And so we actually had, we started Thrive in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, and we funded, we granted for the first time $1 million in funds to Credible Messenger groups to work with our Thrive Academy youth. Currently, as of today, we have 25 Baltimore City youth enrolled since September 1 without an incident thus far, but we're working on metrics for performance and progress there. And additionally, we have 2 teams, one in Baltimore County and one in Baltimore City that was convened, which is the Youth Engagement and Safety Strategy Team, and they're working with us. So Thrive Academy addresses the kids as an immediate intervention who are at high risk of gun violence involvement, but the YES teams are working with us to identify strategies and services for kids who are at a lower or moderate risk of being involved in gun violence, as well as to engage in community transformation. So we have active participation from multiple offices from the mayor's office involved in that strategy. We're also working to expand our community-based program continuum to include not just evidence-based programming, but we are working diligently to free up funding in our agency to support more grassroots organizations, such as the BEATS program that was just here, because those are the programs that resonate with children. Those are the people who connect with children. And so being able to shift funding from the more traditional model of what is evidence-based and shift to what is credible and things that kids want to do to have success, like proven and promising programming. So that is what we're focusing on right now in terms of developing a full continuum of services, as well as keeping our relationships with ROCA and YAP to serve some of our higher, more intense, more serious youth offenders, and engaging in community investment, which is a new initiative that we're doing in concert with DHS and the public safety to look at a concerted or comprehensive funding strategy in target neighborhoods where you have an intersect between both adults and youth who are involved in the juvenile and criminal system, as well as are engaged in the social service programs. So that's our activities moving forward in terms of improving outcomes for youth and families. So that's what's on the agenda right now.
Awesome, thank you. Once again, the state's attorney wasn't able to make it here today, but we will be following up. And we've got Baltimore City Schools here as well. If you guys, I do have some questions for you. If you want to come up here and take one of these seats. Oh, you were hiding.
I'm hiding over here, it's okay. Are there specific questions, or do you want me to talk a little bit about
Just wanted
attendance
to
and
acknowledge
truancy?
you in the meantime. Do we have somebody from school police as well?
Yep. School police is here with me.
Chief
Yep.
Ham. Oh, excellent. So I have a couple of questions. I'll jump into those now. So I think one of the things I was discussing with a constituent was the opportunity for using GPS in vehicles. And this is around the car theft issue, and I'm going to have questions for schools in a moment. But this is for BPD. Have we thought about that as an opportunity for, this is GPS, AirTags or something like that, some sort of GPS system in vehicles? Have we considered that? Is that something that we're utilizing, or?
It's not something currently we're utilizing. I think we're open to all, crime suppression methods. I do know that DC has initiated that, and they're using it. We would have to look at the legality of those individuals who are willing to have it placed somewhere on their vehicle. I know a request has been made in reference to those AirTags and getting them. I think the idea is then those individuals who are willing to then have them placed on the car. We're not opposed to it. We would encourage it as a method of quickly identifying those vehicles that have been stolen and tracking them. So we're definitely a proponent for those individuals who would desire to get it once the funding has been established. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I would, we had MVA on the line earlier. I don't know what happened. We had MVA on the line earlier. I wonder if, with coordination with MVA, we might specifically identify owners of Kias and Hyundais, noting that that's where we're seeing the significant spike for that opportunity. But that was a thought that came up in conversation. I would love to hear, once we explore that avenue, any updates you guys have on that as an opportunity.
Mr. Chair, Nina Themlis with the Mayor's Office. I did want to just let you know that a part of the Mayor's updated strategy for reducing car thefts is the inclusion of digital tracking devices.
Fantastic. Thank you. The other question I had was around truancy, and this has to do with the schools, of course. So I tend to think about, a lot of the crime that we see, it starts before they actually commit crimes, our young people. It starts with whatever resources, boredom, or otherwise our young people have in advance of the moment that they actually commit a crime, steal a car, harm someone or otherwise. And when I think about how we as a city most interact with our young people officially and directly is through our schools. And so, I think one of the gaps that I don't have a full understanding of is truancy and how much of an issue it is, and how we work with people to make sure that their young people are attending school, and therefore we can provide resources or connections through school. So I'm curious if you can tell me a little bit about truancy, how we enforce it, how we work with families, and we can start there.
Yeah. So when we talk about truancy and attendance, we think about it in two ways. One is our attendance percentage, which is just the percentage of students that show up every day. And the other is chronic absenteeism, which is about the same as truancy. And if you miss more than 10% of your days, which would be 18 days in a given year, we consider you chronically absent. Our schools track this information, and we've been putting additional effort, I would say since, last winter and last spring, to the point that with our school leaders, we have ensured that we are looking over their students that are chronically absent and making sure that they've got plans for them. It's not an exaggeration. Last week, we had all of our principals together, and it's about the end of the first quarter. And so they had plans at the beginning of the year. They had specific things that they were doing inside their school. And we gave them 2 hours to go through presentations, look through their data to see if they're getting better, if the students are still not coming to school. I will say right now, as a school system for this school year, our overall attendance is up about 3.5%. I always do the math for people because 3.5% doesn't sound like a lot, but it's really about 2,500 more students are coming to school every day. And even though that chronic absenteeism of 10%, you usually don't look at it until the end of the year, you can look at it after 50 days, right? Because if you've missed 5 days, you're chronically absent. And when we've looked at that, we're about 10% down from where we were last year. It's still high in our opinion, right? It's still right now in the 30 percentiles. And so that's still too many kids that have missed at least 10% of the school year. But I'm telling you that we track this really on a weekly basis, and we devote time with our school leaders to look over their practices, for them to change their practices, for them to look student by student, and then see, right, do they have a mentor? Have they linked up with someone in the school that they feel, trustworthy and confident with? And we go through and have time with them for that. I'll say a couple other things about this. One is, right, that is what schools do and what we support them in doing. But at North Avenue, we also have the Re-Engagement Center. And if you come through the Guilford entrance, it's right there on the right. And this is where, right, students and families sometimes refer themselves, sometimes schools refer students to them. Before we ever withdraw a student, we go through due diligence, including that office reaching out to the family. Last year, they had over 1,000 intakes. And this year, they're even going to surpass that. We then, they go through an intake process where we determine what they need. Sometimes they need a different school. Sometimes they need a different program. And I would say a subset of that I think speaks to some of the things that we've talked about here is students that are coming out of DJS, right? In the last 9 months, we have used funds to link every child that comes out of DJS with a mentor that is community-based, so that right when they come out of the system, they can work with them one-on-one. And students coming out of the system just need different things before they actually enter into school. So in the end, there's a kind of global way that we look at this, and then it gets down school by school. But then for some of the most toughest cases, especially our adolescents, we use our re-engagement center. And with the kids that are coming out of DJS, we even do more.
I see. So just to sort of give me a sense for the scale of need or the scale of the problem, what is our truancy rate as from the previous year or this year?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. So again, the chronic absenteeism is 10% or more of the school days, missed 18 or more of the school days. Last year, we ended the school year at 54%, and that was a reduction by 4%. This year, year to date, we are down to 33%. So we've made right now significant improvements for this first quarter. There's a long way of the school year to go yet, so it is something, that's why I'm telling you that we look at this on a week-by-week basis, and we can't just wait till the end of the quarter or the end of the year. That is when we get our principals together to make sure that they are looking at it, but from a district, we make sure we're looking at it week by week, and right now we're at about 33%.
Interesting. And that's actually quite helpful. I wonder, do we have that disaggregated by age, by number of days absent? Because I think if you're 19 days, you miss 19 days of school, yes, that is problematic, but that young person may still be engaged and active in school. But if you're missing 50 days of school, you're absolutely not.
Yes.
So do we have that disaggregated? Would that be something you could share?
I mean, what we do in the re-engagement center and what we ask our schools to do is to really tier the students, right? We do like to get across that 18-day line so that they're not considered chronically absent. It is part of a school's state rating. They have a star rating that the state has, and chronically absent is one of the parts of that rating. So we do pay attention to that. But we also pay attention to the most truant students and make sure that they are the first ones that we look at. Similarly, when they come into the re-engagement center and they have intake and are assessed, right, depending on their past history of attendance or trouble either in a school or with their grades, right, we give them more or less depending on what really their history has been and what they need in that moment. So yes, we do disaggregate it in a number of ways.
Yeah, I would love if you would be willing to share that data to have a chance to
we
kind
can
of
do
dig
that.
through it.
We can and just to be clear, we disaggregate it by grade, right? We can disaggregate it by school. There's a lot of different ways.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. The other thought here, and my colleague made an excellent point about the difficulty of overlaying different types of data over what we're trying to address here, whether it's with car thefts or carjackings or other criminal-related stuff, and what we can and cannot know about individual students. I know we want to protect their individuality and their privacy, but I think there is also a great deal to be learned about being very particular and specific on how we work with certain students. It sounds to me like, when our young people are having issues and the school identifies that, of course, they would refer, that young person to DJS. DJS can step in with resources, with some of the community programs that exist, and hopefully we can tie off those loose ends and get that person back on the right track. But if they're not attending school, it's harder to do that. It's harder to make sure that they're following through. And so in my mind, when I'm thinking about the steps in order to intervene to get a young person back on track, from a government perspective, Our schools are one of our first steps. And so I want to figure out whatever we can do to make sure that we're helping schools to address the truancy issue. To that effect, further on truancy, I'm curious, I see we have school police in the back. If you don't mind coming up, I actually have a question that I don't know if is relevant to you, maybe it isn't, and, but these are more comfortable chairs. I often hear about complaints about young people being out in the streets during school hours, and I'm really curious how we deal with those instances. Does the police department intervene, step in? Does school police at all get involved? In instances like that where we clearly see an underage person out in the street on a school day, like what do we do? How do we handle that?
So for BPD, yes. So we do have those instances in reference to either specific locations of congregation in front of stores and stuff like that. But we also have, because of the several disallowed zones where we run into youth that squeegee and solicitation. When it comes to our interaction with them, based on what, Stephanie just said, we do realize that our youth interaction is something that is governed by our consent decree, that we try to be least intrusive, most appropriate when it comes to that in our interactions with the youth. So upon BPD's mere presence and approaching, if the individual does leave the roadway or leave the store, then that's a reason why our mere presence has abated the situation. However, through informal conversations, when we get to understand and get to know a youth, we will divert them when we can to a child in need of supervision or a child in need of assistance. We'll also work robustly with the Mayor's Office of African American Male Engagement, Dr. Bunley and his team, who pretty much know the youth that are out there. So we also use them as a conduit of getting the information to the appropriate source in reference to having that individual not outside and in the appropriate resources necessary.
So, Deputy Commissioner, I understand in theory that's what we should do. I'm just not convinced that in reality we're like really going up to young people and saying, hey, you should be in school and referring. I just don't know I'm not convinced that that's happening. And one, because certainly our officers are spread thin across, a couple of hundred other different things, but do school police, do you guys have a role in this at all, or?
Yes, we do.
There we go.
Yes, we do the same thing. We engage the kids that's out on the street, and we also stop in and talk to the store owners. What we try to do is get the store owners not to allow them in the stores during the day. However, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And a lot of times, if we look at they have particular uniforms on, we'll notify the schools and say you may have students that are congregating down in certain areas, like, say, for example, Light Cross. That's an area where some kids go down to the pizza shop there. So we'll go and have conversations with the store owners.
I see. So it's
a lot
mostly...
of times they don't pay it no mind because they're making money. That's the issue. I think that it needs to be fine. If I'm making $2,000 a day selling these kids items, what is a $50 fine or a $100 fine? So it needs to be, the whole thing needs to be looked at.
I see. So, but it sounds like your interaction is more along the lines of young people that are going to school, but maybe leave a little early. Yeah. I see. That's helpful to know. Yeah, I think, the truancy issue is I think, a big opportunity for us. I think it would have, if we can crack that nut, have some reverberating impacts on not only behavior of our young people, because they're not out there unattended to for 8+ hours a day, but then also in their performance in school. So I don't know how to make this work and how to address this issue, but it's certainly something that I think we need to address. And my theory is that part of what we're seeing in juvenile increases in crime can be resolved by, one, just making sure that they're in school. So just a thought there. And last piece, I'm really curious is, what are we seeing by way of location and time? We talked about a lot of crime, and we talked a little bit about specifically juvenile crime. Do we have any sense of the time of day that we're seeing this happen, and any particular locations? Are we seeing this happen around schools or in communities around schools, or what do we know?
Yep, so in reference to stolen autos and the issues that are associated with maybe robberies, we have known a pattern. We've seen some things on Fridays, the weekends. Their time frame has gone from what would be our Charlie shift around sometimes 9 o'clock at night to 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We've seen some clusters in the southeast around Butchers Hill, Patterson Park. We've also seen some clusters in other districts like the southern and the southeast and the northeast. When we quickly identify these problems, the longer patterns normally occur from Friday night to Sunday. We have our last crime call at 12 o'clock on Friday from 12 to 1. So we really won't have another convening meeting until that Monday. What will then happen is if there is a series of incidents that we notify through citywide robbery or any other entity, myself, Colonel Brown, the other two colonels that just left, we will convene a meeting over the weekend, call everybody together either on a Zoom, a virtual meeting, or through our Evertel system of highlighting what we're seeing and what we're doing about it. So that's the longest span that we'll ever have over a weekend, from Friday to Monday at 12 o'clock. Normally, there is only a one-day span between an incident and us having a convening meeting where we go over the high dates, high times, and what are they doing about it. Some days, some successful arrests have been made, and they've addressed it as they should be by either redeployment or by addressing it through other means. There are other times when they have dropped the ball, honestly, where there has been precursors of an event that someone, a shift commander, a sergeant, should have identified it and then been a little bit more proactive in understanding it's bigger than just this one incident. Now we have multiple incidents. I will say, to their, not making an excuse from them, but a lot of times what occurs is the individual street robbery or the robbery of a vehicle, many times we're seeing that the individual's cell phone is taken or in the vehicle. So then there is a delay between the first incident and then the multiple subsequent incidents because they don't have a phone to get to call 911. They've got to track back to a house or track back or find something. So that sometimes gives us the 3-incident window of no one having a cell phone because the cell phone was part of the crime itself. But then that goes back to having robust deployment of officers in the right areas, understanding, is it a one-off or is it something that what we do with our carjacking and stolen auto protocol is once a vehicle has been identified, getting it on the radio, getting it out citywide that, hey, we just had an incident in this district. You may see this subsequent vehicle in your district. Be on the lookout for it because it just hit us here. So we realize that it is through data analysis of the event. We know that these areas are hotspots. We know that these areas are going to be a dense population where these individuals have shown a propensity to be in. So you've got to be there for that. But also data going forward, realistically, right now, we know that we need to be in these areas based on what we're hearing on the radio and how to deploy forward. What we have been doing through our Regional Auto Theft Task Force, our citywide robbery, our mobile metro unit, our Foxtrot, individual cars that have the license plate reader. We have been putting them strategically in our main thoroughfares, as well as other areas where we believe that ingress and egress will occur. So we've been trying to be as proactive as we can be. Sometimes we have been successful. Other times, unfortunately, we have been a little bit behind the ball. Yes, sir.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Deputy. Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to the agencies for sticking around. We know that the causes of youth crime are complex, that it is multifaceted, that there's a lot of impulsive behavior with young people's brains, that there's fight or flight, that there's, in some cases, trauma. Regardless, any crime that is committed, a young person needs to be held accountable. However, we also want to make sure we're preventing preventing crime from occurring in the first place. I remember a few years ago doing a resolution around year-round youth works, and I know that that's something that the Scott administration has taken up. I have heard from some of our young people that have been involved in particularly theft that they are doing it to support a family member. Again, that is wrong, and it is also wrong that they are in that situation to begin with. So wanted to get an update from, I don't know if it's maybe Director Brooks, maybe Nina. I know this is really a MOED. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I know there's a MOED function, but if there is an update, one of the things, especially coming out of the pandemic, that I heard a lot was we would have kids, John Davis, who would stop going to school and would go work at Amazon or would go work at maybe TradePoint or Walmart or wherever. We do not want our young people leaving school. We do not want them, when it was the pandemic, it was like they would put the computer screen on and then just go somewhere else. We don't want that, but we do want young people to have the opportunity to earn money and do it legitimately. And so I am wondering, just in this spirit of preventing crime from occurring before a young person decides to do that, if you have any conception of where we are on moving toward year-round youth works.
So good afternoon again. Dr. Brooks, the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success. So our office has been working collaboratively with MOED, with MOAIM, as well as Director Stephanie from Monty did speak about the work group that Dr. DeRosa has put together, where we also have had Youth Voice that has spoken about that. Indeed, that a lot of the activity that we've seen is because young people want to make money. And so I know that there will be a report coming out very soon with recommendations about how we can make sure that we're providing those opportunities for our young people with, yes, year-round youth works, but with other opportunities as well. I know that our office works very closely with the schools. Baltimore City Public Schools as well, particularly the re-engagement office, to see how we can partner with businesses to provide opportunities for our young people. Also looking at scheduling, alternative scheduling, to be able to provide those opportunities so that our young people are still receiving the adequate amount of education and schooling that they're supposed to receive, as well as being able to make those additional dollars that they're needed. One thing I also wanted to add is that working very closely, our office working very closely with the school's office around truancy, we did participate on the attendance calls in the beginning of the school year because we wanted to hear why young people weren't able to come to school. And so some of the things we heard from parents were because of housing insecurity or because of energy assistance or water bill assistance. And so by having staff from my office there, we were able to provide those supports on this spot. And so we're continuing to partner with the schools, with Baltimore City Public Schools, to ensure that we're putting those supports in place for families and making sure they're aware of those supports so that our young people can be in school and so that our families know the additional resources that are available for them and so that young people can participate in school and not always feel the pressure of having to have those additional dollars come from them.
If I could just, and I appreciate that, Director Brooks, if I could just sort of push and add as well, I think, YouthWorks jobs really important. In some ways, even more important is for our young people to see pipelines into careers. And I know my colleagues, folks on this council, have talked a lot about apprenticeships and different models, but I was at a building trades fair in Baltimore County not too long ago, and I just think about the importance for young people in Baltimore to have access to those jobs as we are building out TradePoint Atlantic in the county, as we're doing all this infrastructure. I mean, we have the IRA, the Infrastructure Act coming online. The Biden administration, I think, is really investing deeply in infrastructure, and that there's a pretty profound opportunity. And I think that one of the things that there's an expression, one of the best things to stop a bullet is a job. And I would say,
even better is a union living wage job. And so I would just push that, as we're thinking about the expansion of MOED and the year-round youth works, that we also be really intentional about working with partners in industry, partners in the trades, to make sure that we are setting our young people up to go after these types of opportunities, because $14 an hour is fine, but you're not really able to take care of yourself and your family on that. But earning $80,000, $100,000 an hour is a really different scenario.
Absolutely, and I thank you for that. And I do know that MOED has worked very closely with city schools and their college and career readiness department to really look at expanding those opportunities, especially for our young people that are currently in the CTE programs, to be able to provide those opportunities outside of the schoolhouse as well as through Youth Works. But I will actually do a little more connecting with those offices as well.
Let me ask, I appreciate that, Director Brooks, and would appreciate that push from your office as well. Let me ask to BPD and to school police, and somewhat picking up on the thread that my colleague was laying down, I think where I've seen a lot of frustration within communities is particularly around dismissal and just a sort of lack of clarity on how young people will safely get home without overly congregating in neighborhoods, without just having nothing to do and just, being bored and ultimately finding trouble. I know that we've done some work, I think, with Monsi and others around the Safe Passage program. But again, I think there's sometimes a gap, and communities will share this with me and probably my colleagues as well, that no one is responsible for those young people. And it ends up, we've had scenarios outside of Patterson High School where school police will point to police and police will point to school police. And again, ultimately we have unsupervised young folks either during school hours, which is even worse, or right after school. And so I'm just curious about kind of the relationship that you all have in making sure whenever there's an issue, particularly during school hours, but after school as well, that we're in really tight collaboration and communication, because sometimes I think it gets lost in the sauce and communities feel like they're just getting punted around and not having the issue resolved.
What I can, excuse me, what I can tell you is that we work closely together. Me and Deputy Chief Jones speak all the time, a reference around schools and dismissals. What we did, I have areas of concern. What I do, I share that with all of my partners, such as MTA Police, City Police. I've been on a ride along with Dr. Brooks, and we're looking at expanding the Safe Passage. Matter of fact, Patterson is one of the locations, that Eastern Avenue corridor down to Kane Street. We're looking at least 6 different locations and expanding that and utilizing resources through Dr. Brooks' office for external partners because of the shortage of officers, so that we can have an extra eyes out there who can give us, word if there's problems in the community. Because city police is dealing with the same thing I'm dealing with, the manpower issue. Sure. So if we can have extra eyes out there through external partners that can assist us in providing a safe passage, not just for the kids in the Patterson area, but throughout the city. We've done a ride along, and we looked at the areas that concerned us with the major challenges, and so that's what we've been working on. Dr. Brooks, she's kind of worked with me a lot lately as far as just identifying areas.
Yes, as Major Coleman has said, we've conducted 2 ride-alongs on the east side and west side. We've identified through data as well as through observation some hot spots of where young people are congregating at the end of dismissal and prior to dismissal, where they're hanging out. We have seen where in parks, where young people are in parks, and we know when young people are just hanging out, idle time, they are young people. They get involved in some activities that they should not be involved in. And so Major Coleman and I have identified those spots. We've identified some businesses where we are going to put actually the logo, the Safe Passage logo. If a young person does not feel safe walking, they're able to go into that business area and just say, I don't feel safe. I just want to be able to use my cell phone to make a telephone call. But also identified some of our partners, We Are Us, some other partners. MOAIM has also had some of their staff that are in those spaces as well. And we really focused on walking paths because we have heard from constituents saying that young people are cutting through their yards or in their front yard or backyard. We know in some of the alleys, again, we talked about some of the parks, and some of the businesses have also complained. As Major Coleman said earlier, we've even had conversations and we see that some of the business owners are selling to our young people, and then once it becomes too many young people, then they begin to complain. So really trying to work with them to say, well, these are the hours that you're not supposed to be selling to them. So we're trying to encourage them not to. But as Major Coleman said, we have done 2 ride-alongs. We have also aerial shots so that we know exactly how many additional supports we would need to have in those spaces, but really focusing on walking spaces because we know that if young people see adults, incredible adults that are in those spaces that have built rapport with them and engage with them, they will move on. And so looking at that, but then also looking at spaces where they feel comfortable going because we know not all young people want to go home right after school. So also providing opportunities and places for them to go where they feel comfortable going after school.
Any for that?
Thank you, Councilman. I'm going to wrap up, but I have a couple of requests that I hope will be helpful for the agencies here and also certainly for the committee in thinking about how we can be more thoughtful in how we're working with our young people, both within our schools and otherwise. So first, I wanted to ask for a truancy plan, and I really want the police department, school police, and the school system to think about what that looks like, both for young people that are out and about in the streets at any time of the day, and then also for our young people that are just chronically absent and not showing up regularly. And I would love if we could get that data that you discussed earlier, the disaggregated data to figure out the age groups and the sort of days that they're out of school, and if there's anything that we can do as a council or as a committee to help the school deal with that issue. The other piece that I wanted to request, and I'm not sure if you're able to share this with me, so I'll ask for it, and then you tell me no if you can't share it. But I don't know if there's a way to tell if there is overlap between the young people that are chronically absent and the young people that we tend to find are involved in some of the crimes that we're beginning to see. I'm not sure if that's available. I'm not sure how to pull that. But what I really want to understand is, are we working with the same population when it comes to truancy? Is it the very chronically absent young people? I don't suspect it's the barely chronically absent people with 19 days missed of school. But that would tell me that we should be really focusing our efforts on a certain threshold and making sure that DJS, for instance, is getting those referrals and especially following up with those young people because that's where they can shine. And then from the last hearing, we talked about DJS. The request was the data on the reoffending rates for programs. When we refer young people to programs, I'm not sure how we break that out, but what I really want to be able to identify is what programs are working, and when we're referring to these programs, are they working, and under what circumstances. So the referral may have been a very serious one or not so serious one, and so it's not exactly a one-to-one. Certainly willing to interpret that with your guidance, but I do want to, it does help to quantify it and see what's going on. Yeah. Any further questions, Councilman? I really appreciate you guys. You guys gave me almost 4 hours out of your day. And I hope the conversation was enlightening. It certainly was for myself. We're going to go on a recess here, and thank you all.